Hello, everyone. It's Laurie and Jenny, and we are going to have a little conversation today about the upcoming Mercury retrograde. Now, first of all, before we even talk about this current Mercury retrograde, I want to just say that if you pay attention to a lot out in the world, you hear people get all nervous about Mercury retrograde, and I just want to say, I've sort of been on a platform about this for some years. Let's make Mercury retrograde in our thinking, in our minds, get it into a positive space. Because Mercury retrograde really can be an incredibly great opportunity to clean up issues from the past, to get caught up on old projects that have been hanging around. So, Mercury retrograde is not something to be worried about. You do want to pay attention. Let's just be really clear. There are a few things you want to pay attention to. During the retrograde, you don't want to go out and buy a new computer. You don't want to sign contracts. You don't want to buy a new car. You don't want to make agreements that you might not be able to get out of or change later. But what you do want to do, and I always encourage people on my website to really sit down and think about it ahead of the retrograde and make a list of all the things that are left undone, all the things you haven't finished. Because if you focus on that list during the 3 weeks of the retrograde, you're going to be incredibly accomplished during that time while everyone else is complaining, okay? And Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year. So we might as well learn to love it because it happens repeatedly. It's not an uncommon occurrence. So there's that. Now, I'm going to, because I feel like I'm talking too much, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny, and I'm going to ask her to talk about what the hell does it mean? Is Mercury actually turning around and going in a different direction?
Oh, those are great questions. And you weren't going on too long. It's perfect. In my studies of the retrograde, I just want to say I was born with Mercury retrograde in my chart. So I've been kind of curious about it and wondering what that means. And in a natal chart, it can mean just, a little bit of delay in thinking or communicating. It can mean it's a little bit of a wild child. And it has to learn how to acculturate itself. So it's kind of wild and off the beaten track. And then it has to kind of figure out how to interact in normal society. We'll say. Anyway, so that's my little side note about that. But really what it speaks to is our perspective. From our perspective on Earth as we're cruising along, and Mercury and Venus are both inside orbit closer to the sun than us. And so it's not a totally straightforward relationship as to what we see. But what I can say is that those two planets are speeding past us. They're faster than us. So there's certain times in which they appear to be going backwards. From our perspective, they are not actually going backwards. They are on their own orbit. It's just that our perspective looks at it like that. And I just think that's really important because in my mind, that is one of the biggest gifts that astrology gives us is a perspective. It is not ironclad absolute truths. It's showing us this lens through which we view the world. So that's my little 2 cents about that. And the other thing I wanted to say, Laurie, about you talking about how everyone kind of freaks out about it. Well, part of it is just because our society likes to think it's like this linear thing that just charges ahead and you just check things off the list and you move forwards. And the reality is you've got to have times when the field can be fallow. You've got to have times when you're not doing that, when you have a chance for retreat, when you have a chance for sleep is a great thing that we must do. But so it really is an opportunity. The more that we can take that on board and include it in what we're trying to do, the better it is for us. The chance it gives us time to regroup.
Yeah. I love Mercury retrograde. I really do. It's one of my favorites. And it took a long time to get that perspective, to understand how to utilize it. But if you work it, it's really great. I'm going to cover a few dates. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Let's see. So Mercury goes into its shadow. What that means is, okay, Mercury starts at one point and it's going along, and then it slows down, and then it turns retrograde, and then it turns direct and goes forward. When you think about the point, the when it's retrograde, the farthest backwards it goes, when it is in its initial pushing forward, when it gets to that point, that's when it is in its shadow. I don't know if I articulated that in a way that made sense or not. Did that make sense, Jenny, how I said that?
I think so, but just to kind of add one other thing. So when it retrogrades, it's going to on October 13th. It's going to be at 11 Scorpio,
Yes.
and it's going to go all the way back to 25 Libra. So
Right.
what we want to know is, when did it first hit 25 Libra? And that's the shadow period.
That's the shadow period. Yeah. Thank you. That
Yeah.
You explained it much easier than I did. So on September 23rd is when it entered its shadow. And that's actually when things, you're going to come back to that point. Your thinking is going to come back to the point where it was at on September 23rd. That's one way to think about it. That process it takes after the 23rd is where it's going to come back during the retrograde. So on September 23rd, it enters its shadow at 25 degrees Libra. It goes retrograde, like you said, on October 13th at 11 degrees Scorpio. And then it stations direct, and this is one of the most interesting points of this particular retrograde, is that it stations direct. Where's the bells and whistles here? Stations direct on November 3rd. We all know what November 3rd is, right? Right. November 3rd is the US elections. And what I think is really fascinating about this is that the last time Mercury stationed on a US election was in the year 2000. Now, if you don't remember what happened in the year 2000 with our US elections, you can either look that up on Google, or you probably remember it unless you're very young and just weren't paying any attention. But that was the year that it was Bush and Gore, and the election wasn't decided, and there was hanging chads in Florida, and counts were being redone, and finally, ultimately, the Supreme Court gave the election to Bush. So we know that Mercury retrograde, when people are counting ballots, when we're already in the state that we're in, we know that this election is not, you're not going to go to sleep on the 3rd or stay up late and find out who the president is. It's not going to happen. It's going to be so complex and convoluted. And when we actually look at the charts and how that Mercury plays into the rest of the chart, it's going to deepen our concern about the election, I would say.
Okay. For sure. I mean, certainly the symbolism, delays, chaos, confusion around communication.
Yeah. So do you want to pull up that chart?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do.
The only thing I wanted to just add, just to close the loop, is so it will come out of its shadow period. That means it'll go back to 11 Scorpio direct November 20th. So the entire period we're looking at September 23rd to November 20th for the Mercury retrograde, and the heart of the 3 weeks of the actual retrograde, October 13th through November 3rd. In your personal chart, you're going to want to know where Libra is and where Scorpio is, because it's going to cross that line. If you're using whole sign houses like we do, that means it's going to be a broad reach across 2 areas of life. Okay, so let me grab this chart.
So during that period of time, while it's retrograde, look at those 2 houses. Be careful about your communications in those areas, and that type of thing too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here we go. So this is here we have the Tuesday, October 13th, 9:05 p.m. And this is just about the time when you'll see Mercury's got that little R symbol right there to show that it's gone retrograde.
Yeah, there's the little R.
Um, I think probably the most prominent thing we're going to see in this chart is its opposition to Uranus.
Wow, look at that.
That's pretty,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that, when you think about Uranus and Mercury being opposed to each other, what do you think about?
Well, in a way, Mercury and Uranus are, Uranus is a higher octave of Mercury.
Yeah.
So you're talking about like sort of electrified energy, highly charged communications. They both tie in some ways to a mindset. It's not the only way to look at it, but it is one way. So you really have this like Mercury that is sort of being electrified and elevated to a bigger level.
And the other thing that I think of with this particular opposition is with that Mercury being in Scorpio, it's wanting to dig deep and find out what's hidden under the surface. And Uranus is like, wake up, look what's under here.
Yeah.
You know, so that electrification of the thoughts, of the communication, of the news is really about waking up to what we're digging up.
Yeah.
There's an element of that in there too. Huh.
Yeah. And we've focused so much attention on the cluster in Capricorn because of what it symbolizes with the pandemic and the election, with civil unrest, all these things we've seen, especially in this country this year. But Uranus is being there, you know, just ringing the bell of wake up. It's both a source of major disruption, or a symbol for major disruption, and a source for major awakening. And we've seen both of those things in play this whole time. And next year, we're going to really see the interplay of Uranus and Saturn in a square. And that is what next year is going to be dominated by.
Yeah. 2021 is going to all be about Uranus and Saturn in a square.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very different process.
Yeah. And you know, with Uranus and Saturn, you're talking about Uranus is the breakup, the change out, the like break away from tradition, take things into a different direction. There's a destabilization happening. Though in bringing in the Taurus designation, it kind of gives you this interplay of destabilization yet stabilization, which I keep interpreting it as waking up to the natural cycles of the earth that we really got to pay attention to and start bringing ourselves in line with it.
And the other thing with that is that Saturn, when it is squaring Uranus, is going to be in Uranus's sign of Aquarius.
So what that suggests is, and I think it's Richard Tarnas that says in Cosmos and Psyche, that Uranus is going to win. Uranus is the breakup. And if there's one thing that is certain in life, and that is change. Yeah. And you can't, you know, clinging to not change is, it just doesn't work. So yeah, what's great about astrology is when you look at these things and you start thinking about these things, you can start to prepare, you can start to become aware, you can start to awaken and take these things on board.
Yeah. My in all the years that I've studied astrology, there's always been that understanding that when it's Uranus and Saturn, Uranus always wins. Uranus is the future. Saturn is the past.
That's great.
And yeah. I get a little bit cautiously hopeful.
I mean, things do need to change. There's got to be some shifts here, and we're living in a very tumultuous time. The other thing that you can't necessarily see in this chart, because I don't have it, but what we wanted to say was that the Mercury, when it enters its shadow period on September 23rd, it will be in a tight square with Saturn. It'll be at 25 Libra squaring Saturn at 25 Capricorn. So that is how the start, we've already seen that. We're recording this, what is it, October 7th? So that happened a while ago, where we saw that square starting this out. And so Mercury touched base with that, and then it is opposing Uranus, or it actually opposes Uranus October 7th. But what we're saying is that it has an interaction with both of those planets in its retrograde period. And those are actually the only two that it has that direct interaction.
So what you're saying is during the retrograde, the pieces that Saturn is really like, with a retrograde, you get 2 hits of a particular pattern. So, I mean 3. So you get 3 hits of Mercury opposing Uranus, and we'll get 3 hits of Mercury squaring Saturn.
Exactly.
So
exactly. Yep.
that is, that whole story of this Mercury retrograde, starting with the shadow, ending, in November, the end of November, as it gets out of its shadow, it's bringing this whole story of 2021 to light.
Hmm. Yeah, it is.
Beforehand, it is
Yeah,
preparing us for 2021. It's
it is.
giving
It's
us
setting the stage. Yeah.
a view. It's
Yeah, and I like to think of sometimes Mercury's kind of like the megaphone. So it's like, it's like on September 23rd, it squares Saturn, and it's sort of giving a little bit of a megaphone to Saturn, and then just, what is it, a couple weeks later, October 7th, it's going to oppose Uranus, and then it's going to give that megaphone back and forth a couple times to both. And actually, in between that shadow period, its final contact is November 17th. It will oppose Uranus again directly. So that whole interaction is happening in that shadow period from September 23rd to November 20th.
Oh, that's so
in both.
interesting. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. So it's bringing up all of this struggle we've been in the middle of and where the future is bringing us. This is really important.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing you mentioned too, Lori, that was great, was just that, and it's in Scorpio, so it's digging down at the roots. It's trying to get to the core of the issue,
Right.
expose, the unstable roots, or
Right.
whatever's
So,
happening.
and here's another way to think about that. The square is a challenge. It's challenging that old pattern, that Capricorn stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
challenging that, and it's waking us up to the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
Great.
illuminating the future. It's challenging the past and illuminating the future. Oh, this excites me. I like that.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it.
Yeah.
The
Like
other thing that's, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's all. I'm just
Oh, it's
repeating
great.
over and over. I like that. I like that.
Yay, something good. The other thing I thought was interesting is that the moon here is in Virgo along with Venus. And that's Virgo's the sign that Mercury rules. So it kind of brings it into that connection. And it's in a sextile, in a really nice sextile with Mercury. So I like that. It's that thought of like just kind of bringing that aspect into it. Just this more softer, the
Yeah.
more feminine focus of the moon and Venus together, sextiling that and kind of saying, okay, it's okay to look that deep.
Right.
It's, we need to work with it. And Virgo is the roll up your sleeves and get to work on it kind of attitude.
And
Yeah.
our more practical values.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. Cool.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about this?
No, I think that covers everything for me. What about you?
Yeah, I think we've kind of covered what's in this chart.
Cool. Cool.
Anything else about like look, is there anything else that would be helpful to look at?
I think that's it. You want to, again, just make sure you find where that the Libra and the Scorpio are in your chart, so that you know where that Mercury retrograde is happening in your own life, where you need to pay attention to
Review, kind of
reviewing,
revisit.
yeah, revisiting your thought processes in that area of your chart. So what houses does that cover for you, Jenny?
Well, the 4th and 5th. So I've got Libra in the 4th, and we were talking about the new moon before, and just thinking about where that Libra is. So there's a lot of activation for all of us, whatever Libra holds for you, because the new moon is only a couple days after this retrograde.
Yeah.
So just to think about. So for me, it's 4th house going into 5th house. So it's kind of like, how do I stabilize all the different things going on with home, so that I can then work on the creative acts I need to do, which all revolve around astrology. So
What I was thinking is, you got to get your parents into their own house so that you can bring your wife home.
yeah. Yes.
Kind of as simple as that. For me,
Yes.
it's in the 2nd and 3rd, so it's really about, values and communication. And that's appropriate. That's appropriate. for sure.
Great.
All right, I think
Okay.
we've covered it. And
I'm gonna stop
thank
that.
you, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
We
Thanks
will,
everybody for watching.
yeah, we'll talk to you all the next time around. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.